Another cold morning after about an inch of snow overnight and yesterday afternoon. That was really not particularly well connected to a weather system. There's a little bit of a trough that you might see here over northern Lake Michigan and southeastern Lake Superior. And that probably was the disturbance that kicked off the snow for us last night. It was easy to shovel. It's kind of powdery. The more active weather is to our south and east over the southeast United States. It's raining in most places in Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas. But just on the northern fringe of the precipitation, you'll see in pink here some freezing rain. As far south as central Louisiana, south of Jackson, Mississippi is freezing rain, and then also in the southern part of Virginia and very far northern North Carolina. So this is an unusual and usually very scary weather event anywhere, but especially in places where they're not used to having slick roads. So in parts of the deep south today, some freezing rain, and that'll be some issues for certain populations for sure. And in the central United States, we have a domination by this extraordinary high pressure region where you can see the isobars are kind of pointed downwards to the south across central Texas. These lines of constant sea level pressure are every 4 millibars or so they're drawn on this map. And you can see also where the Rocky Mountains are because this air cannot go up over the mountains. It's shallow, cold Arctic air. It can't go up over the mountains, but it does produce a gigantic contrast in pressure from places like in western Nebraska and just about at the peak of the Rockies near Boulder or Denver, Colorado. So extraordinary pressure gradients in such locations, and that can actually force the flow to go up the slope to higher elevation in the Rocky Mountains. And you'll notice that all the way along the Rocky Mountain chain, there's scattered snow showers, and those are so-called upslope snow events. And sometimes they can be, really substantial, but only when they're connected to a moisture source from the Gulf of Mexico. In this case, it does not look like that conjunction is likely to occur. So these will be scattered, probably innocuous snow showers in many places. But when it snows in Lubbock, Texas, people notice because it doesn't happen that often. And so anyway, a pretty cold continuation of our cold spell. It turns out that on Wednesday, we actually did reach a high temperature in Madison of 11 degrees. And remember, I'd been rooting to keep us at 10 or lower for a number of days in a row. Well, it turns out that there is a second, sort of a silver medal here, that if we have all the way through Monday, a high temperature of less than 11 degrees, we will tie a record for the longest such streak, which is also 10 days. The thing is, the last time it happened was in 1999, so it's not as remote as the 10 straight days of highs at 10 or lower, which would have forced us to go back almost 60 years. So nonetheless, we're going to end up with a pretty notable cold spell here. Complete absence of daily records, but a record length. And that will be of some interest, at least to me, maybe hopefully to you as well. Okay, so that's what we're staring at for the situation about our streak. Now, here's this morning's surface temperatures at about 7 a.m. local time. It's 1 below zero in Madison, 6 at Green Bay, closer to the lake, 6 at Marquette, closer to the lake. All the lakes are still unfrozen, even after this period of cold. There's increasing ice on the lakes, but not complete coverage. And that's a big deal for losing water in the Great Lakes over the wintertime. The more open water there is, the more evaporation there is, and that water vapor gets carried quite far away from the lakes routinely because the watershed, the area over which rain that falls flows into the Great Lakes, is nearly the same size as the Great Lakes. It's not very much bigger. And so it's easy to transport water away from the Great Lakes, and it never comes back. And with no ice on the lakes, that's a serious threat this year. And it looks like it's coming into reality. Look at how cold it is at International Falls, minus 34. That's brutal. We are going to see much colder overnight temperatures. We're going to struggle to get near 10 degrees on the weekend both days, single-digit highs, maybe even just barely above zero on one of those days. So it's going to be a very cold weekend. And remember last Friday when we were talking about the forecast, it seemed as though the mid part of the week was going to be slightly more moderate than the coming weekend. And this coming weekend now is coming right in as the forecast suggested it would 7 days ago. So that's a pretty good forecast. It's hard to really overstate the revolution that we've undergone in the last 50 years, certainly, and 75 years, absolutely, in the ability to forecast the weather. And people take it for granted, but it's one of the greatest scientific advances of the second half of the 20th century, without any doubt. And we're really cold in a lot of places here in the Central Plains this morning. Single digits all the way down to the panhandle of Texas. Single digits over most of New England. Boston's an exception at 11 because it's right near the ocean. But even New York City, 18. That's pretty cold for New York City. So this is a really cold February 12th that we're experiencing across the country today. Here is the satellite movie I'm going to start it for you. Here's the satellite movie over the continental United States and adjacent waters. On Wednesday, I made note of this extreme cyclone that was spinning around in the North Atlantic to the southeast of Greenland. It's still there, and that's the same storm. It's just had a very long, extended, late part of its life cycle. So really quite an amazing event. For us over the continental United States, here's the cloud mass that's associated with all the rain and some freezing rain on its northern fringe in Louisiana and places that we'd mentioned. And there's a lot of thunderstorm activity in the far western Gulf of Mexico that seems to be associated with this disturbed weather across the southeast U.S. Here's over the Intermountain West. It's going to, by the time of the end of this animation, get itself over to Utah. This is a pretty decent-looking, well-organized weather system, and that's going to impinge upon us late in the weekend. So we may have some effects from that combined with our cold, and it could be a little bit more snow. An inch or two is likely over the weekend at some point, probably Saturday night into Sunday. And then off the coast, we'll see this a little bit more close up in a minute because it's oblique right now. We're looking at a pretty intense storm off the coast of the Pacific coast of the United States. And I want to just point out, now that we've talked about radiation a little bit in class, this satellite movie that I show you every day, I'm forced to show it because the sun is not up early enough for an 11 o'clock lecture to show you a nice 12-hour movie of the visible satellite. By the end of the term, we'll see a little more visible, but we're looking at the infrared satellite movie. And so what this is all these different colors of gray, black, white, and all that. They are translated from the information the satellite takes in about what the temperature of the object is, and we know what the temperature is if we can tell how much radiation is being emitted in these infrared wavelengths, right? That's from the Boltzmann law. And if we know what the temperature of the object is, we can write a computer code that translates the temperature to a color in the grayscale. So look at deep space. Outer space is bright white, the brightest white on the image, and that's because the temperature of outer space is about 2 or 3 degrees Kelvin. That's really cold. But then, when you look down here over the tropical Atlantic Ocean, without any cloud cover apparently, this is really warm. The temperatures of the surface temperatures of the water here are about 25 degrees C, something like that. So it looks really dark. And everything else that's warm looks dark. Look at most of the state of Texas. Not quite as warm as the ocean, but warm. And then as soon as you go across the Red River into Oklahoma, maybe there's low-level fog or something that's keeping that cooler. And the surface that's radiating out energy to space is cooler than the surface of the planet. And look at this fog that's encroaching northward over the panhandle of Texas. See that? So little details like that. And right here in Ontario and Saskatchewan, and just north of Minnesota, it's just kind of a bright white. That's not clouds, because you can watch as it animates. Nothing's moving past. That's just testifying to where the air is really cold. And you'll see that in a minute on the 850 millibar map. This air is like minus 35 degrees C, and that's what's going to give us a cold weekend. So this infrared satellite image can tell you a lot more than just about weather systems. It can tell you something about where the cold air is as well. And we do like to use it for that reason, especially in instances like this. So here's our radar across the continental 48 states, and you can see all the precipitation stretching from just on the southern tip of the Chesapeake Bay all the way back down to just off the coast of Brownsville, Texas. And so you've got a pretty decent line of convective rain coming through New Orleans and just offshore of the northwest Gulf Coast. And then here is the rain that's kind of broken up a little bit over the Carolinas and Georgia, and then much of this might be freezing rain in northern Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. And then here's the light scattered snow showers, some of which are right over us, some over the Dakotas, a little bit over parts of Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, and that's tied to that evolving weather system that we're likely to experience in a bit over the weekend. And then some light rain in the southern part of the Puget Sound, Columbia River Basin. One other feature I have to point out to you, which is really, really interesting, is this band of high reflectivity that is along the long axis of Lake Michigan and actually extends a little bit into Lake Superior as well. This is a lake effect snow band, and it's called a shore parallel band, and it forms under certain kinds of large-scale conditions. First, the air has to be really much colder than the surface of the water temperature on Lake Michigan, and it is. When it's 15 degrees Celsius colder or greater, the air that is, then you can get these snow bands of one kind or another. This is a really interesting one because it's about 400 miles long. So we're going to look at this one in a little bit more of a close-up, but without much more information. So here's a close-up of that radar sequence going all the way from north of Washington Island in our own state, all the way down the axis of the lake to the northwest counties of Indiana. And so all of these little reflectivity echoes are snow showers. And isn't it amazing how they stay exactly parallel to the long axis of the lake? And for reasons that would take a little too long to describe, but it's one of the forms that these lake effect snows can take over Lake Michigan. It's one of the more interesting ones in my mind. Unfortunately, the satellite movies that go along with this to show you the cloud structure are not very illustrative, so we'll have to stop with just this, but it's quite an interesting radar loop. And then finally, let's go to the West Coast. And much of the end of last week and early part of this week, I kept on saying that it looked like the West Coast was finally not as stormy as it had been in the first 2 weeks of the course. But that's changed now. Here's the storm that we saw coming in off the coast and is affecting, snow showers in Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Colorado. That's this storm coming in last night over the northern coast of California. And then looking west, there's a cloud band that goes, again, I'll point out where Hawaii is with the cursor. It's right here. And so you can see this is a cloud band that stretches across more than half the Pacific Basin and has its feet in the tropics. And it's making its way all the way up toward the British Columbia coast. And there's one disturbance on the front end of it and a better looking disturbance that I'm highlighting right here to the northwest of Hawaii that is getting itself organized in the central Pacific. So it's going to be a stormy week in the Pacific Northwest, I think, and I think that's going to have ramifications for the weather that we will experience here. I think that's actually going to be part of a circulation change that will finally moderate our temperatures as we move into next week. So that's going to be interesting, and that's what the picture looks like on the satellite right now. And since it's Friday, let's go to our forecast for the week, which was a really good forecast last week. Boy, was it right on target. So this is a forecast made last night around midnight, and so this is valid at 7 a.m. Remember, I showed you on the satellite picture the bright white spot in central Canada in the infrared satellite image. Look at how that's exactly co-located with the coldest air at a mile above sea level. These are 850 millibar temperatures in color, and so these are temperatures at about 1 mile above sea level. Minus 36 degrees C in that light green. And then where it's orange and yellow, exceptionally cold. So this is why temperature at International Falls is minus 34 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface this morning, and it's going to be impinging upon us as the weekend goes on. However, we're going to see this cold pool sort of evaporate. It's going to disappear a little bit as we move forward. So let's do that. So here we go, 12 hours further ahead. This is, no, it's not 12 hours ahead. Here's 12 hours ahead to Saturday morning, and you can see the coldest air is right over Lake Winnipeg, and it's just made a little bit of southward progress. Let's go ahead 12 more hours. So we get to Saturday night, and it's made its way into northern Minnesota and made it a little bit colder for us. So that's why we're going to stay cold. We're going to go ahead 12 more hours. And here we are on Sunday morning. Notice how that cold pool is getting smaller and smaller, at least the area that's orange and yellow. And we're getting colder. There's still cold advection funneling in over Madison at this time. And so we'll keep on going. And you can see no more yellow left in that cold pool. It's just about evaporated away to nothing. That's Monday. This is Monday morning. We've got a strong temperature contrast region across the central part of the country. There's likely to be precipitation along this line, but we're deep in the cold air, but thankfully not as cold as it has been. And then we'll get to Monday night. A little storm ripples along that temperature contrast region. That'll make its way up toward New England. It'll be snowing in southern Illinois, southern Indiana, parts of northwestern Ohio at this time, and maybe 12 hours later it's going to be snowing in western New York State and some other places like that. We stay cold. It's as cold as it can be in North America, or in the United States anyway, over Madison, all the way through Tuesday morning. And then here we are Tuesday night. We're still cold, and it gets a little more interesting as we move to I got to get to the right time. As we move to Wednesday night, a little bit of a storm starts to develop on the southern tip of this cold pool that's kind of made its way into Texas. We still are very much colder than just about any place else in the U.S. And by Thursday morning, this storm starts to take shape over Arkansas, northern Louisiana, and we're still really cold. So depending on where exactly this storm goes, in the current forecast, pulls it to our south. It's a big snowstorm for Kankakee to St. Louis to Joplin, Missouri, and leaves us with maybe a half an inch of snow Thursday night into Friday. But if the track of this storm changes at all and moves a little bit further north, and at a week out, that's a possibility, we may be seeing a major snow here on Thursday night into Friday. So I would be telling my friends, and I count you among them, that you should stay vigilant about what happens at the end of next week. It's not going to warm up, but we are under the threat of a pretty major snowstorm. This would be Thursday night when the storm in this current forecast is too far south to bring snow to Madison, but it's bringing a major, unusual snowstorm to St. Louis and, as I said, a line to about Kankakee, Illinois. And so if this changes, we have to watch out for a snow at the end of next week. And we stay cold. We do not ever get into air that's above 0 degrees at 850 millibars throughout this whole week. So February we're going to get to the 19th of February at least, and we'll be running about 15 degrees below normal for the month. So it's going to be a colder than normal February over the Great Lakes states for sure by this point. And that's what we're looking at. So let's keep our fingers crossed for maybe some exciting Thursday night and Friday weather, and we'll see what happens.